The rain had stopped, but the cold October wind still cut through David's thin jacket like a knife. He pressed his back against the brick wall of the alley, trying to find some shelter from the chill that seemed to seep into his bones. His stomach, cramped with hunger, a familiar pain that had become his constant companion over the past 2 days. David pulled his worn baseball cap lower over his eyes and watched the busy street beyond the alley. People hurried past with their heads down, focused on their phones or their destinations. Nobody looked his way, and that was probably for the best. He knew what they would see if they did look: a 19-year-old kid with dirt under his fingernails, clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks, and the hollow look that comes from too many nights sleeping on concrete. The smell of garlic and fresh bread drifted from Romano's Italian restaurant across the street. David's mouth watered despite himself. He remembered the last time he'd eaten a real meal, 3 days ago, when he'd found half a sandwich in a dumpster behind a deli. The memory made his stomach twist with both hunger and shame. He'd been walking the streets for hours, looking for work, for help, for anything. Every shop he'd entered had the same result. The moment people saw his appearance, their faces would change. Store managers would suddenly remember they weren't hiring. Restaurant owners would find excuses to send him away. Even the local shelter was full, with a waiting list that stretched for weeks. David watched through the large windows of Romano's as couples shared plates of pasta and families laughed over steaming bowls of soup. The warm golden light inside looked like something from a movie, a world he used to be part of before everything went wrong. Just 3 months ago, he'd been working at Thompson's Auto Repair, earning enough to pay for his small studio apartment, and even save a little each month. He'd had plans back then, maybe community college, maybe his own garage someday. But when Mr. Thompson had to close the shop due to his heart problems, David's world had crumbled faster than he could have imagined. Without a job, the rent became impossible. Without an address, finding new work became a nightmare. It was like falling down a hill. Each tumble made it harder to get back up, and pretty soon he was rolling too fast to stop. David pulled his jacket tighter and was about to turn away from the restaurant when he noticed her. A woman in her early 50s sat alone at a table by the window. She wore a navy blue coat that probably cost more than David used to make in a month, and her graying hair was pulled back in an elegant style. But what caught his attention wasn't her obvious wealth, it was the way she kept looking at her plate. She'd ordered what looked like chicken parmesan with a side of pasta, but she'd barely touched it. Instead, she seemed lost in thought, occasionally taking a small bite before setting her fork down again. David watched as she pushed the food around her plate, clearly not interested in eating. His stomach growled loudly, and he pressed his hand against it, trying to quiet the noise. The woman had enough food on her plate to feed him for 2 days, maybe 3 if he was careful, but asking for leftovers. The thought made his face burn with embarrassment. David had never begged before. Even in his worst moments over the past few weeks, he tried to maintain some dignity. He'd looked for work, searched for help, even tried to do odd jobs for a few dollars. But begging felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure he could come back from. Still, as he watched the woman signal for the waiter and ask for a to-go container, something desperate inside him stirred. She was going to take that food home, and chances were it would just sit in her refrigerator until it went bad. Meanwhile, he was standing in an alley, dizzy with hunger, trying to remember the last time he'd felt truly full. The woman paid her bill and gathered her things. David's heart started pounding as she stood up and walked toward the door. This was it, his chance. If he was going to ask, it had to be now. But his feet felt glued to the pavement, and his mouth went dry. She stepped outside and paused to put on her gloves. The to-go container was tucked under her arm, and David could see steam still rising from inside it. His stomach cramped again, more sharply this time, and he took a shaky step forward. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't hear him over the traffic noise. She started walking toward a sleek black car parked nearby. David knew he had seconds before she drove away, taking that food with her. He hurried across the street, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said louder this time, trying to keep his voice. Steady. The woman turned around, and David saw her face clearly for the first time. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and small lines around them that suggested she smiled often. But when she saw him approaching, her grip tightened on her purse, and David felt his hopes sink. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said quickly, before she could walk away. "I saw you in the restaurant, and I noticed you didn't finish your meal." He swallowed hard, his pride warring with his desperation. "I was wondering. If you're not going to eat it." He couldn't finish the sentence. The woman stared at him, and David braced himself for rejection. He'd seen that look before, the mixture of discomfort and pity that crossed people's faces when they encountered someone like him. Usually it was followed by a hurried excuse and a quick escape, but something unexpected happened. Instead of looking away or making an excuse, the woman's expression softened. She really looked at him, not the way most people did, with a quick glance that took in his worn clothes and unwashed hair before looking away. She looked into his eyes, and David felt like she was seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time in weeks. "You're hungry," she said simply. It wasn't a question. David nodded, not trusting his voice. The kindness in her tone made his throat tight with emotion he'd been holding back for days. "When did you last eat?" she asked, and again there was no judgment in her voice, only genuine concern. 2 days ago, David admitted, his voice cracking slightly. The woman's face changed, and David saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen from anyone in a long time. Compassion. Not pity, not fear, but real human compassion. She held out the container without hesitation. "Here," she said. "Please, take it." David's hands shook as he accepted the warm container. "Thank you," he whispered, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. But instead of walking away, the woman did something that surprised him even more. She stayed. The woman didn't walk away. Instead, she stood there watching David hold the warm container, and something in her expression made him feel like she genuinely cared about his answer to her next question. "What's your name?" she asked softly. David looked up, surprised. Most people who gave him spare change or food didn't want to know his name. They preferred to keep their distance, to help without getting involved. But this woman seemed different. "David," he said quietly. "I'm Catherine," she replied with a small smile. "David, would you mind if I asked you something?" He nodded, still clutching the container. The warmth from the food was spreading through his hands, and he realized how cold he'd been. "How did you end up here?" Catherine asked. You're so young. You don't look like you've been on the streets very long." David felt his face heat up. He'd been dreading this question for weeks, mainly because the answer made him feel like such a failure. But something about Catherine's gentle tone made him want to tell the truth. "I was working at an auto repair shop," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thompson's Auto Repair, about 10 miles from here. I'd been there for almost 2 years, Mr. Thompson. He was good to me. Taught me everything I know about cars, sighed I had natural talent." Catherine listened without interrupting, her full attention on his words. "But then Mr. Thompson had a heart attack," David continued. "A bad one. The doctor said he couldn't work anymore, needed to take it easy, so he had to close the shop. Just like that, I was out of work." "That must have been scary," Catherine said. David nodded. "I thought I'd find another job quick. I was good at what I did, but nobody wanted to hire someone without experience at their specific shop, and without a job, I couldn't pay rent. My landlord gave me 2 weeks, but that wasn't enough time." He paused, remembering those frantic 2 weeks of job hunting, the growing panic as each day passed without success. "I stayed with a friend for a while," David went on. "But his roommate didn't like it, and I couldn't blame him. I was just this extra person taking up space, eating their food, so I left." "Where are your parents?" Catherine asked gently. David's jaw tightened. "My dad left when I was 12. Mom's got her own problems. She's been struggling with addiction for years. I can't go back there. It's not safe." Catherine's expression grew sad, but not in the pitying way David was used to. It was more like she genuinely hurt for him. So you've been on the streets for how long? She asked. 3 weeks, David admitted. I keep trying to find work, but it's like this crazy cycle. I can't get a job because I don't have an address. I can't get an address because I don't have a job. And every day I'm out here, I look worse, smell worse, and people trust me less. He looked down at his hands, surprised at how much he'd shared. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Because you need someone to listen, Catherine said simply. When did you last have a real conversation with someone? David thought about it. I guess it's been weeks. The people at the shelter are nice, but they're so busy. And most folks on the street, they're dealing with their own problems. There's not much talking. Catherine was quiet for a moment, and David wondered if he'd said too much. But then she surprised him again. You know what I keep thinking about? She said, you mentioned you were good at fixing cars, that you had natural talent. What did you love most about it? David's eyes lit up for the first time in their conversation. Everything, I guess. There's something about figuring out what's wrong with an engine, you know? Like solving a puzzle. And when you get it right, when you hear that engine purr like it's supposed to, it's this amazing feeling. You miss it, Catherine observed. Every day, David said. I dream about it sometimes, having my own shop, maybe. Helping people fix their cars, keeping them safe on the road. Mr. Thompson used to say I could do it someday if I worked hard enough. What's stopping you now? Catherine asked. David almost laughed, but it came out bitter. What's stopping me? Look at me. I'm homeless. I haven't showered in a week. I'm asking strangers for their leftovers. Nobody's going to trust me with their car. But what if those things weren't problems anymore? Catherine pressed. What if you had a place to live, a chance to clean up, an opportunity to work on cars again? What would you do then? David stared at her, confused by the hypothetical question. I don't know. I'd work harder than anyone, I guess. I'd prove that I could do it. You'd really want to have your own shop someday? More than anything, David said without hesitation. I know it sounds crazy given where I am right now, but yeah, that's what I want. Catherine nodded slowly, as if she was processing something important. David, can I ask you something else? Something personal? Sure. What? Happened to your hope? I can see it in your eyes when you talk about cars, but the rest of the time you look like you've given up. David was quiet for a long moment. No one had ever asked him that before. I think I lost it somewhere between the 10th job interview and sleeping in the park for the first time, he said finally. It's hard to hope when every door gets slammed in your face. When people look at you like you're something they might catch. When you start wondering if maybe they're right, maybe you are worthless. You're not worthless, Catherine said firmly. You're a skilled mechanic who's had some bad luck. There's a difference. David looked at her with surprise. How can you say that? You don't even know me. I know enough, Catherine replied. I know you're polite enough to say excuse me before asking for help. I know you're honest enough to admit when you last ate instead of lying to get more sympathy. I know you loved your job and were good at it. I know you left your friend's place because you didn't want to be a burden. Those things tell me about your character. David felt tears prick his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said something genuinely nice about him. Why are you being so kind to me? He asked. Most people cross the street when they see someone like me coming. Catherine smiled, and David noticed it reached her eyes. Because 30 years ago, I was in a situation where I needed help. Someone took the time to see me as a person instead of just a problem. It changed everything for me. What happened to you? David asked, curious. That's a story for another time, Catherine said. But I learned something important from that. Experience. Sometimes the difference between giving up and changing your life is just one person who believes in you. David felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he'd almost forgotten. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope. I should let you go, he said, suddenly aware that he'd been talking to this stranger for almost 20 minutes. Thank you. For the food and for listening. David, Catherine said as he started to turn away. What if I told you I might be able to help you get back on your feet? Would you be interested? David stopped and turned back, hardly daring to believe what he'd heard. What do you mean? David's heart started racing. The way Catherine had asked the question, with such seriousness in her voice, made him think she wasn't just being polite. But he'd learned not to get his hopes up too quickly. Life had taught him that lesson the hard way. I'm not sure what you mean, he said carefully, searching her face for any sign that she might be joking or testing him somehow. Catherine glanced around the busy street, then back at him. This isn't really the best place to talk about this. Are you free tomorrow morning, around 9? David almost laughed. Free? He was homeless. His schedule was completely open. But something in Catherine's tone made him take the question seriously. Yes, I'm free, he said. There's a small diner called Mel's about 6 blocks from here on Oak Street. Do you know it? David nodded. He'd walked past it many times, always stopping to look at the pictures of breakfast plates in the window and imagining what it would be like to sit inside and order whatever he wanted. Meet me there tomorrow morning, Catherine said. I have something I want to show you, something that might change your situation. But I don't understand, David said. Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me. Catherine was quiet for a moment, and David could see she was choosing her words carefully. Let me ask you something, David. Do you believe in second chances? I want to, he said honestly. But I'm not sure I believe in them for people like me. What do you mean, people like you? David gestured to himself. People who mess up, people who end up on the streets, people who can't seem to get their lives together. Catherine's expression became firm. David, listen to me. You didn't mess up. You lost your job because your boss got sick. You lost your apartment because you couldn't pay rent without a job. You ended up on the streets because you had nowhere else to go. None of that was your fault. But I should have been smarter, David protested. I should have saved more money, had a backup plan. You were 19 years old, working at an auto shop, Catherine said. How much could you possibly have saved? And why should a teenager have to plan for his boss having a heart attack? David had never thought about it that way. For weeks, he'd been blaming himself for not being more prepared, for not having savings, for not having family to fall back on. But when Catherine put it like that, it sounded less like personal failure and more like bad luck. I guess I never looked at it that way, he admitted. That's because you're a good person, Catherine said. Good people blame themselves when things go wrong. They think they should have done more, been better, worked harder. But sometimes bad things happen to good people, and it's not their fault. David felt something loosen in his chest, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too long. So you'll meet me tomorrow? Catherine asked. Yes, David said without hesitation. But can I ask you something? Of course. Are you really going to help me, or are you just being nice because you feel sorry for me? Catherine looked him straight in the eye. David, I don't make promises I can't keep. If I'm asking you to meet me tomorrow, it's because I have something real to offer you. Not charity, not pity, but a real opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Come tomorrow and find out, Catherine said with a small smile. But I will tell you this much, it has to do with cars. David's eyes widened. Cars? That's all I'm going to say for now. But David, I need you to understand something. What I'm going to offer you tomorrow isn't a handout. It's going to require hard work, dedication, and probably some of the most challenging months of your life. Are you ready for that? David thought about the past 3 weeks, sleeping on benches, going days without food, being turned away from job after job. How could anything be more challenging than that? I'm ready, he said, even if it means starting over completely, even if it means admitting you need help and accepting it. David nodded. I've already lost everything. I don't have any pride left to swallow. Good, Catherine said, because pride is what keeps most people from accepting the help they need to change their lives. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill. Here, she said, holding it out to him. I can't take your money, David said, stepping back. Why not? Because I didn't earn it, Catherine smiled. David, you just proved my point about being a good person. But this isn't charity. Consider it an advance on tomorrow's conversation. Get yourself a shower at the community center, maybe some clean clothes from the thrift store. Not because I care how you look, but because I want you to feel confident when we talk tomorrow. David stared at the money. $20 could buy him a decent meal, a shower, maybe even a cheap shirt that didn't have holes in it. Are you sure? He asked. I'm sure. David took the money with shaking hands. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me, Catherine said. Just show up tomorrow. And David? Bring your appetite. Breakfast is on me. David watched as Catherine walked to her car, still hardly believing the conversation had really happened. As she drove away, he looked down at the container of food in one hand and the $20 bill in the other. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than desperation. The next morning, David arrived at Mel's diner 15 minutes early. He'd used Catherine's money exactly as she'd suggested, a shower at the community center, a clean shirt from the thrift store, and even a small tube of toothpaste so he could brush his teeth in the community center bathroom. He still looked like someone who'd been sleeping rough, but he felt more human than he had in weeks. Catherine was already there when he walked in, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a folder on the table in front of her. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. You look good, she said as he slid into the seat across from her. I feel better, David admitted. Thank you for the money. It made a big difference. I'm glad, Catherine said. Are you hungry? David's stomach growled in response, making them both laugh. I'll take that as a yes, Catherine said, flagging down the waitress. Order whatever you want, David. We're going to be here for a while. David ordered pancakes, eggs, bacon, and orange juice, more food than he'd eaten in a single meal in over a month. While they waited for the food to arrive, Catherine opened the folder she'd brought. David, I want to tell you about my late husband, she said. His name was Robert, and he owned a small auto repair shop about 20 minutes from here. He ran it for 35 years, built it from nothing into a successful business. David listened carefully, wondering where this was going. Robert died 6 months ago, Catherine continued. Heart attack, just like your Mr. Thompson. The difference is Robert and I didn't have any children. When he died, I inherited the shop, but I don't know the first thing about running an auto repair business. She pulled out a set of keys and placed them on the table between them. The shop has been sitting empty ever since, Catherine said. All the equipment is still there. The tools, the lifts, even some of the parts inventory. But without someone who knows cars, it's just an empty building. David stared at the keys, his heart pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying I have a business that needs someone who understands cars. And you're someone who understands cars but needs a chance to prove it. You want me to work for you? David asked, hardly daring to believe it. I want you to work with me, Catherine corrected. There's a small apartment above the shop. It's not fancy, but it's clean and it's yours if you want it. In exchange, you'd work to get the business running again. David felt dizzy. But why me? Why would you trust me with something so important? Catherine leaned forward. Because sometimes the people who have lost everything are the ones who work hardest to rebuild. And because I think Robert would have liked you. The waitress brought David's food, but he barely noticed it. His mind was spinning with possibilities and fears. What's the catch? He asked finally. No catch, Catherine said. Just hard work. And a lot of learning. But David, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about fixing cars. If you take this opportunity, you'll be rebuilding your entire life. Are you ready for that? David looked at the keys on the table then, back at Catherine's kind face. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. Yes, he said. I'm ready. The keys felt heavier in David's hand than they should have. As Catherine drove him to the shop, he kept turning them over in his palm, still not quite believing this was really happening. The 20-minute drive felt like the longest and shortest journey of his life. There it is, Catherine said, pulling into a small parking lot in front of a single-story building with large bay doors. A faded sign read, Robert's Auto Repair, in blue letters that had seen better days. David got out of the car slowly, taking in every detail. The building looked solid, but tired, like it was waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot, and one of the windows had a small crack running down its length. "It doesn't look like much right now," Catherine said, noticing his expression. But Robert always said the bones of a business matter more than the paint on the walls. She unlocked the front door, and David followed her inside. The smell hit him immediately: motor oil, metal, and something else he couldn't identify. It was the smell of work, of purpose, of a place where things got fixed. The main garage area was larger than he'd expected, with 2 hydraulic lifts and workbenches along the walls. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and there were parts bins organized by size. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but David could see the careful organization underneath. Robert was particular about keeping things in their place, Catherine said, running her finger along a dusty workbench. He said a messy shop was a dangerous shop. David walked over to one of the lifts and pressed the button. Nothing happened. "Power's been shut off," Catherine explained. "We'll need to get that turned back on." "This is incredible," David said, looking around with growing excitement. Mr. Thompson's shop was smaller than this, and he did good business. "This place could handle twice as many cars," Catherine smiled. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." "Want to see the apartment?" They climbed a narrow staircase at the back of the building. The apartment was small but clean, with a kitchenette, a living area, and a bedroom. The furniture was old but well-maintained, and large windows let in plenty of natural light. "Robert used to come up here during his lunch breaks," Catherine said. "He'd sit in that chair and look out at the shop, planning his afternoon work." David stood at the window, looking down at the garage bay. He could picture cars lined up waiting for repair, could imagine the sound of engines running and tools clinking. For the first time in months, he could see a future that looked different from his present. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course." "Are you doing this because you feel sorry?" "For me, because if you are, I appreciate it, but I can't accept charity." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "David, can I tell you about the worst day of my life?" David nodded. "It was about 30 years ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, and I thought I had everything figured out. I'd landed what I thought was a dream job at a marketing firm in the city. Good salary, nice office, plenty of opportunities to advance." She sat down in the chair by the window, and David could see her lost in the memory. 3 months in, I discovered my boss was embezzling money from client accounts. When I tried to report it, he fired me and somehow made it look like I was the one stealing. I was arrested, charged, and even though the charges were eventually dropped, my reputation was destroyed. No one would hire me. I lost my apartment, my car, everything. David felt his breath catch. "You were homeless?" "For almost 4 months," Catherine said. "I lived in my car until it got repossessed. Then I slept in parks and shelters. I applied for every job I could find, but my former boss had made sure word got around that I was trouble." "How did you get out of it?" "A woman named Mrs. Patterson owned a small accounting firm. She was the 15th person I'd asked for work, and I was ready to give up. But she looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something other than my circumstances. She gave me a chance to prove myself." Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mrs. Patterson didn't just give me a job. She taught me about business, about building relationships with clients, about seeing opportunity where others saw problems. When she retired 15 years later, she sold me the business for half what it was worth." David was quiet, processing this new information about Catherine. "That's how I met Robert," she continued. "He was one of my clients. A hard-working man who built his business from nothing but never learned how to manage the books properly. I helped him organize his finances, and he taught me that success isn't about how much money you make, but about how much good you do for people." "So you're helping me because someone helped you," David said. "I'm helping you because you remind me of who I was 30 years ago," Catherine said. Someone with skills and determination who just needed a chance to prove it. But David, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. If you take this opportunity, you'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life. David felt a flutter of nervousness. What do you mean? Running a business is about more than just fixing cars, Catherine said. You'll need to learn how to talk to customers, how to estimate jobs, how to order parts, how to keep books. You'll need to get your high school diploma if you want to be taken seriously. And you'll need to build a reputation from scratch. The weight of what she was saying settled on David's shoulders. He'd been thinking about this as just a job, but Catherine was talking about something much bigger. I don't know if I can do all that, he said honestly. Do you want to try? Catherine asked. David looked out the window again at the empty garage bay. He thought about the past 3 weeks, about sleeping on benches and asking for leftovers. Then he thought about the feeling he'd had when he was working on cars, the satisfaction of solving problems and helping people. Yes, he said, I want to try it. Good, Catherine said, because I'm going to be here to help you every step of the way. I'll teach you the business side, help you with customers, even help you study for your GED if you want. You do all that? Mrs. Patterson didn't. Just give me a job and walk away, Catherine said. She mentored me, guided me, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I'm going to do the same for you. David felt overwhelmed. I don't know how to thank you. You thank me by succeeding, Catherine said. By proving that second chances work. By maybe giving someone else a chance someday when you're in a position to do it. They spent the rest of the day at the shop, making lists of what needed to be done. The power needed to be turned back on, the equipment needed to be serviced, supplies needed to be ordered. David would need work clothes, basic tools of his own, and a dozen other things. It's going to take time, Catherine warned. Probably 2 or 3 months before we can take our first customer. Are you prepared for that? I've got nothing but time, David said. As they locked up the shop that evening, David realized something had changed inside him. The hopelessness that had been his constant companion for weeks was gone, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten, excitement about the future. Catherine, he said as they walked to her car. Can I ask you one more thing? Of course. Why didn't you just sell the shop when Robert died? Why keep it all this time? Catherine smiled. Because Robert always said this place was about more than making money. It was about helping people, about being part of the community. I couldn't bring myself to sell it to someone who might not understand that. And you think I understand it? I think you understand what it means to need help, Catherine said. And people who understand that make the best helpers. As they drove back toward town, David watched the shop disappear in the side mirror. Tomorrow he would start the hardest work of his life. But tonight, for the first time in months, he was going to sleep with hope instead of despair. The apartment above the shop was small, but it was his. The work ahead would be challenging, but it was work with purpose. And Catherine wasn't just giving him a job. She was giving him a chance to rebuild his entire life. David had learned that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. A woman had shared her leftovers with a hungry stranger, and now that same stranger was about to become a business owner. He fell asleep that night planning his first day of work, already dreaming about the sound of engines and the satisfaction of a job well done. 2 years had passed since that cold October night when David had asked Catherine for her leftovers. Now, standing in the doorway of what was officially called Patterson's Auto Repair, he could hardly believe how much had changed. The shop buzzed with activity. 3 hydraulic lifts were occupied with cars in various stages of repair, and the sound of air tools and engines filled the space. David had insisted on keeping Mrs. Patterson's name on the business, honoring the woman who had given Catherine her second chance decades ago. Hey boss, this transmission is ready for pickup, called Jake, one of the 2 mechanics David had hired 6 months earlier. Jake was about David's age, fresh out of technical school, and eager to learn. Thanks, Jake. Make sure you test drive. It once more before the customer gets here, David replied, wiping his hands on a shop towel. Even after all this time, Hearing someone call him boss still felt surreal. The past 2 years had been the hardest of David's life, but also the most rewarding. Catherine had been right about the challenges. Learning to run a business was nothing. Like just fixing cars? There were permits to obtain, insurance to buy, suppliers to negotiate with, and customers to keep happy. David remembered his first real customer, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought in her ancient Honda Civic 3 months after they'd reopened. Her car had been making a terrible grinding noise, and she'd been quoted $800 for repairs at another shop. David had fixed it for half that price, and Mrs. Rodriguez had been so grateful she'd told everyone in her neighborhood about the honest young mechanic who charged fair prices. Word spread slowly at first. David would go entire days without a single customer, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Catherine never let him give up, though. She'd sit in the small office. She'd set up in the corner of the shop, handling the books and answering the phone, always encouraging him to be patient. Good businesses take time to build, she'd tell him when he got frustrated. Robert's first year, he barely made enough to keep the lights on. But he never compromised on quality, and eventually people noticed. The breakthrough had come about 8 months in. Tommy Martinez, a local delivery driver, had brought in his work van after 3 other shops had told him the engine was beyond repair. David had spent 2 full days diagnosing the problem, finally discovering a hairline crack in the engine block that everyone else had missed. Instead of recommending a new engine, David had found a way to repair the crack for a fraction of the cost. Tommy had been so impressed that he'd recommended David to his company, which had a fleet of 20 vehicles. That contract had been the turning point, providing steady income and establishing David's reputation for solving problems other mechanics couldn't handle. "David, your 4 o'clock appointment is here," Catherine called from the office. She still came in every day, handling the administrative side of the business while David focused on the technical work. They'd developed a partnership that worked perfectly, with Catherine teaching David about customer relations and business management while he taught her about cars. The customer was a young woman named Lisa, probably in her early 20s, driving a beat-up sedan that was making concerning noises. She looked nervous as she approached David, clutching her keys tightly. "Hi, I called about my car making weird sounds," she said quietly. "But I need to be honest with you, I don't have much money. I'm a student and I work part-time at a coffee shop. If the repairs are going to be expensive, I might have to wait." David smiled, recognizing something familiar in her worried expression. "Let me take a look first," he said. "We'll figure out what's wrong and then we can talk about options." He spent 20 minutes examining her car, checking the engine, the brakes, and the suspension. The problem was relatively minor, a worn belt and some loose connections, but he could see Lisa was still anxious about the cost. "Good news," he told her. "It's not as bad as it sounds. The belt needs replacing, and I need to tighten a few things, but it's maybe an hour of work plus parts. Probably around $60 total." Lisa's face lit up with relief. "Really? The place I went to last week said it would be at least $200. "They were probably trying to sell you things you don't need," David said. "Your car's old, but it's got good bones. Take care of the basics and it'll run for years." As David worked on Lisa's car, he found himself thinking about that night 2 years ago when he'd been in her position, young, broke, and desperate for help. He remembered how Catherine had looked at him with compassion instead of judgment, how she'd seen his potential instead of just his circumstances. "All done," he told Lisa when he finished, "but let me give you some advice. This car's going to need new tires soon, and the air filter should be changed every 6 months. If you keep up with the small stuff, you won't have any big surprises." Lisa paid the $60 with obvious relief, thanking him repeatedly before driving away. David watched her go, feeling the same satisfaction he'd felt when he'd fixed his first car at Mr. Thompson's shop all those years ago. "She reminded you of yourself, didn't she?" Catherine said, appearing beside him. David nodded. "Yeah, she did. Makes me want to help her even more." "You did help her," Catherine pointed out. "You charged her a fair price for honest work." "That's Helping, as they closed up the shop that evening, David looked around at what they'd built together. The walls were covered with thank you notes from customers, photos of challenging repairs, and certificates from the technical courses David had completed. He'd gotten his GED 6 months after starting the business and was now taking evening classes in business management at the community college. "Catherine," he said as they walked to the parking lot, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "I want to start a program here. Maybe partner with the local high school, teach kids about car repair, give them a chance to learn a trade, maybe even offer internships." Catherine smiled. "That's a wonderful idea. What made you think of it?" "I keep meeting young people like Lisa, like I used to be, kids who are struggling but have potential. I want to give them what you gave me, a chance to prove themselves." Robert would have loved that idea, Catherine said. He always believed this place should be about more than just fixing cars. David looked back at the shop, its windows glowing in the evening light. A sign in the window read, "Now hiring, will train the right person." He'd put it up the week before, not because he needed another employee, but because he wanted to give someone else the opportunity that had changed his life. "You know what's funny?" David said. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was sleeping in alleys asking strangers for food, convinced I'd never amount to anything. And now?" Catherine asked. "Now I realize that night when I asked you. For your leftovers wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a completely different one." Catherine's eyes were bright with pride. "Mrs. Patterson used to tell me that sometimes we have to lose everything to find out who we really are. She said the strongest people are the ones who've been broken and put themselves back together." "Do you think I'm strong now?" David asked. "I think you're stronger than you know," Catherine replied. "But more importantly, I think you're ready to help someone else discover their strength." As David drove home that night, he thought about the full circle his life had taken. He'd gone from asking for help to being in a position to offer it, from having nothing to having a business, a purpose, and a future full of possibilities. The next morning, David arrived at the shop early, as he always did. As he unlocked the door and turned on the lights, he noticed a young man sitting on the curb across the street. The guy looked maybe 18 or 19, with worn clothes and that hollow look David remembered from his own worst days. David watched as the young man stood up and approached the shop hesitantly. When he got closer, David could see he was nervous, probably working up the courage to ask for something. "Can I help you?" David called out, his voice gentle and encouraging. The young man looked up with hope and desperation in his eyes. "I saw your sign about hiring," he said quietly. "I don't have much experience, but I'm willing to work hard. I'll do anything, sweep floors, organize parts, whatever you need." David looked at the young man and saw himself 2 years ago, lost, hungry for opportunity and desperate for someone to believe in him. He thought about Catherine's kindness, about Mrs. Patterson's second chance, about the chain of help that had led him to this moment. "What's your name?" David asked. "Tyler," the young man replied. "Well, Tyler," David said, opening the shop door wider, "why don't you come in and tell me about yourself? I think we might be able to help each other out." As Tyler stepped into the shop, David realized this was what Catherine had meant about paying it forward. The kindness she'd shown him wasn't meant to end with him. It was meant to flow through him to someone else who needed it. The circle was complete, but it was also just beginning again.